friends, and welcome to your math video all about temperature. I am so excited to share this information with you. Please have out your notebooks to jot down any notes you might have. Let's begin. First of all, let's talk specifically about what we are learning today. We will practice reading a thermometer, focusing on the intervals. This is a standard of learning 3.10. That says the student will read temperature to the nearest degree. So what is temperature? Temperature is how warm or cold something is. We often use a thermometer to give us this information. We see the word Fahrenheit and Celsius used a lot when talking about temperature. Both of these words are used to measure temperature. In the United States, we use Fahrenheit as we measure temperature when we tell how hot or cold something is. Okay, let's take a look. There are many different tools that can measure temperature. Jot down a few. Do any of these tools look familiar? We have outside thermometers, turkey thermometers, a thermometer to measure the indoor temperature, as well as thermometers that help take our temperature used on humans. There are many different ways and tools that we use to measure temperature. But let's talk about something important. Here we see a thermometer. Let's take a look at Celsius and Fahrenheit, comparing the two. Celsius on the left, Fahrenheit on the right. Let's start with the temperature of boiling water. We know boiling water is very hot. Water will boil at 100 degrees Celsius or 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Now both are the same temperature, but Celsius and Fahrenheit are measured differently. Here we can see when water would freeze at 0 degrees Celsius, or we say freezing is 32 degrees Fahrenheit. I know we've been experiencing temperatures like that a lot around here lately. And finally, the temperature of our blood. When we use a thermometer, we like our temperature to be around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, now something very important. Let's talk intervals. Intervals are how we are going to count up to measure the temperature. Let's look more specifically now. Okay, friends, we have lots of different thermometers that we are going to look at to talk about intervals. All of these have different intervals to measure the temperature. Let's start here where the yellow star is. First of all, I want to start by looking at the Fahrenheit temperature. The Fahrenheit is going to be everything over here on the right. So the first thing we want to do is look at where the red line is. But over here we can see how the intervals are measured. Look, let's start here, for example, 160. The next time we come up, we see 180. Then we have 200 and 220, 240 and 260. If you notice, it goes up by 20 each time. So then when we see this little halfway mark right here, we know that's going to be going up by 10. So we would have, let me get out my pen tool here, we would have 160 here, and then this one would be 170, 180, 190. The problem is some people think that every time we see one of these little lines right here, we're going up by 1. But that's not the case for these intervals. We need to make sure that we know exactly what these lines represent. And in this case, the longer line represents going up by 10, and then the halfway mark between there would be 5. So we would have, let's start with 180 right here, 185, 190, 195, 200. So every time we see a little line, we need to go up by 5. Now let's take a close look at how we're going to measure this temperature. I like to start with Fahrenheit because that's what we use in the United States. I draw a line across because then I know I'm measuring exactly. And if I look closely, when I draw my line right across, it's going to land right here at 240 degrees. So we would say this thermometer is reading 240 degrees Fahrenheit. We use the little circle to represent degrees. That's the measurement for temperature. Now let's take a look at Celsius over here on the left. Notice these intervals are different. So over on the right with Fahrenheit, we went up by 20, but here, take a look. 70, 80, 90, 100. Are you seeing a pattern here? I hope you can see that these are increasing by 10. So halfway between the 70 and 80 would be going up by 5. So we would have 70, 75, 80, 85, 90, 95, 100. So even on the left, every time we see a line, we're increasing by 5. Now notice that on this side, the temperature falls somewhere between 110 degrees and 120 degrees, right there on that middle line. Well, I know that every time I go up, I'm increasing the temperature by 5 degrees. So 110 degrees plus 5 more degrees will be 150 degrees Celsius. Let's take a look at some other intervals. Okay, moving over here to the next star to the right. Okay, friends, so here we see that the temperature is just being measured in Celsius. So let's start at what numbers we're seeing. We're seeing a 0, a 5, and a 10. So I do notice that this is skip counting by tens, but there are little lines in between. Let's talk about those little lines. We see 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Every time we go up with these little lines, it is going up by 1 degree. So here we have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So the intervals are skip counting by 5s, but if we go by the little lines, we increase by 1. So let's take a look at this temperature in Celsius. Remember, we like to draw a line straight across. We know that it falls somewhere between 0 and 5. Now we talked about earlier how each little line goes up by 1. So let's take a look here. We have 0 here, 1 here, so this next little line must be 2. This thermometer is measuring 2 degrees Celsius. Notice that the intervals on the first 2 thermometers were different. Let's take a look right here at the third, the circular thermometer. You often see thermometers like this outside. Okay, we are going to start by measuring in Fahrenheit. The Fahrenheit is going to be the outside numbers. Okay, friends, so let's start at 0. Here we start at 0, and then we go to 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 120. Are you seeing a pattern here? Every time that this thermometer goes up, it goes up by 20 degrees. The intervals, or how it's measuring, is 20. So we know that when we jump from one number to the next, we're increasing the temperature by 20 degrees. Now, we are looking at the outside numbers to measure Fahrenheit. Even for a thermometer like this, I like to draw a line straight across. Now I notice this line cuts almost directly through the 100 degree mark. So I can safely say that this is 100 degrees Fahrenheit. If you notice, the inside here indicates the temperature at what it would be in Celsius. So the smaller numbers there would represent Celsius. And starting at 0, which is right here, we see that it goes 0, 10, 20, 30. So the intervals on this thermometer for the Celsius degrees would be increasing by 10. Let's end with our last thermometer at the bottom. This is a thermometer that you might use in your own home. Okay, friends, let's start here with the top, measuring in Celsius. Okay, I'm going to highlight the numbers that I see. 60, 70, 80, 90. Can you tell the intervals? Every time we jump to another number, we are increasing by 10. So the halfway part right here, the little lines that we see there, If it's halfway between 60 and 70, we know that would be 65. So every time we go up by a little line, we're increasing by 5. So we would have 60, 65, 70, 75, 80, 85, 90, 95. Okay, now let's look closely here. We're going to start with Celsius. We notice that if I draw a red line, it's somewhere between 90 and 95. So my best estimate for what this temperature would be, a reasonable guess would be somewhere between 90 and 95. It looks a little bit closer to the 95 than it does the 90. So I would say this is about 93 degrees Celsius. Let's look at Fahrenheit now. The Fahrenheit's at the bottom. Now let's see the intervals here. 140, 150, 160, 170. Oh, I'm seeing this is increasing by 10 as well. And there are lots of little lines in between. Let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Wow! So every little line goes up by 1 degree. Okay, so I see right here that we have 200 degrees, and this line cuts almost directly onto that 200 degrees. So I know that this is measuring 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Intervals are so important in being able to read temperature correctly, because if we're looking at it and it doesn't come right across the number, say like this first example right here, let's take a look right here one more time. On the Celsius side, it did not go to 120 or 110. It went between. So we need to know that every little line in between those numbers increased by 5 in order to tell the right temperature. So let's review. We use a thermometer to measure temperature in degrees. We know how important it is to make sure that we identify the correct intervals when doing so. Okay, friends, here's what's up next. Make sure you complete the attached survey that came with this video, and use any holiday time to get caught up on progress. I hope you all have a great day. Bye, friends.